we began a series back, I guess it was in the old building before we moved here. And we'd started a series and we were walking through the book of Proverbs. And we kind of drifted away from that. The Father led us in another direction. And we've done a lot of different messages on all kinds of different topics since then. But I feel the need to get back to a series here in the book of Proverbs. And Luke, week before last, reintroduced an introduction of this series in my absence, in which he kind of brought everybody back up to speed. If you weren't here, I'm sorry, you'll have to go talk to Luke, and maybe he'll give you a 45-minute sermon and get you back up to speed. But with that being said, the book of Proverbs, I think that it's safe to say that everybody in this world that would agree, all of us in this room anyway, would agree, that, man, this world needs some wisdom. This world is a world of hurt right now for the lack of wisdom. And that's exactly what this book opens up and tells us, that, as it says in Proverbs 1, verses 2 through 4, these proverbs are for gaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring the discipline that produces wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and upright living, for giving prudence to the naive, and knowledge and discretion to the young. I didn't know what today was when it comes to Bible study or testimony. I'm thankful that I've got men that I can trust and that I've entrusted to delegate and deal with that. And we rotate testimonials and Bible study topics. And when I've been gone for 3 weeks, I had no idea where we were at, what we were doing, and to come in and hear Karis's testimony. And honestly, thank you for sharing that, because it's amazing, because now there's comfort. It's when you think you've had it bad, just remember Karis's testimony. Karis had a tough life. But there was something she said, of all the things that she said that were relevant, that stuck out to me. And it was this: well, if that's God, I don't want any part of him. And I don't know if you caught that thread through her testimony, or if you weren't here, but as she shared the tragedies and the travesties that she went through, and the trials and things that she went through in her childhood, all by people who profess to be Christians. And my prayer is, oh God, don't let us be that people. And it brought relevance to the message in the book of Proverbs. For wisdom and discipline, understanding words of insight, acquiring the discipline that produces wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and upright living, for giving prudence to the naive, and knowledge and discretion to the young. The overall arcing theme of the Bible is this: we should be a people that attracts people to the kingdom of heaven. Just that alone, I'll preach for days. We should be an attraction to God, not the cause for one to go home at night when there is no one around to go, oh God, if that's you, I don't want to be anything near you. I've shared the testimonies multiple times of even the simplest things, of talking to waiters and waitresses about those who hate working on Sundays, because Christians are those people who are impatient, inconsiderate, rude, and cheap tippers. I didn't say it, they did. Help us to not be that people. Let us be different in a good way. The Bible calls us to be peculiar people. That's not identified as extremely weird. Peculiar in the sense that we should be extremely attractive to a world. Now, it is true. I heard a man say something one time that made sense, and he said, when you try to let your light so shine, it's an interesting thing because adolescent young people, especially those, and I say that not in the sense of age, but in the sense of maturity, is young people like to throw rocks at things that shine. And unfortunately, bright lights attract strange bugs sometimes. But nevertheless, we should be a people that's attractive to the world. We should be those people in whom, when the world has problems, they look to you and they ask for wisdom. In Proverbs chapter 10 is where we're going to be talking about verses 5 through 11. Just breaking down, because I think that's the biggest problem that this world also has, is understanding the relationship between faith and the Word, between faith and action or faith and works. And it boils down to biblical interpretation many times and how we look at the Scriptures. So we're going to break down a few verses here just as we begin this series. This is a marathon. You're not going to get the answers today. But stay with us through the marathon as we go through to learn wisdom and help us know how to walk more uprightly in our walk. And I found some interesting things. I'm thankful for Brother Danny Reed last week as he come and spoke in my stead, and he began to talk to you about that word, that Hebrew word that means to whet. And immediately that touched base, because that's a funny thing. I'm like him. I've always got a knife. Everywhere I go, I'd be better off to not have my wallet than to not have my knife, because it's a useful tool for me all the time. But as you talked about that wet rock, about being able to wet and sharpen that stone, many people don't know what that looks like today, especially young people or people that didn't grow up in the hills of the Appalachian Mountains like we did, and knowing what a wet rock is and how to sharpen a stone. And everybody that's been around me for any period of time knows I love a sharp knife. And when I'm working in the kitchen or working in the field, working on a job or hunting or fishing, I need a sharp knife with me, because you never know when you're going to need it. But in the same way that, wetting a knife on a stone, sharpening that, we should be as iron sharpens iron, as one man sharpens another in our walk. And let's see if we can glean some wisdom from a few of these verses in Proverbs as we open back up in this series today. Follow along with me, if you will, in Proverbs chapter 10. It begins in verse 1. We're going to be looking at verses 5, and I think that's where Brother Luke left off, was verse 5, week before last. But I'm just going to reintroduce verse 5 as we go back in. But verse 1 says, the Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. I'm just glad it falls on her shoulders and not mine. Thank Yahweh for the word. It's all her fault. It's going to be all the weight falls on her. No, I'm just kidding. And please understand that I felt convicted in the beginning of my ministry, and even as I come in this walk, that a lot of times you're going to hear me use a lot of different translations. A lot of times I'll platform from the King James, and it's not because it's my favorite translation. It's not the once all fix all. It has interpretational bias, just like all English translations do. But I was convicted by the Heavenly Father, I believe, to use this translation as the platform for my teaching. Why? Because of one reason. It's the most widely accepted translation in the world. And there are people that if you don't use this translation, they won't hear you. And I want to try to be all things to all men, so that by all means some might be saved. So don't think that I'm cherishing or uplifting any particular translation above another, but it's also handy when you're using it, because a lot of times it's linked to Strong's, which allows me to do quick word searches and be able to look into some things. But I'm going to be talking about several different versions here. Follow along with me. But in verse 5 it says, "He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, and he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causes shame." The Lexham English Bible translates this as, "He who gathers in the summer is a child who is prudent. He who sleeps at the harvest is a child who brings a shame." The International Standard Version reads, "Whoever harvests during summer acts wisely, but the son who sleeps during harvest is disgraceful." Really quickly, as just reintroducing this particular verse, Luke left off here and done a great job in his opening of this study, but it brings back, and I know he done a really good job opening up and showing you the metaphorical language, the figurative language that's found all throughout the book of Proverbs. It's found all throughout the Bible, and we should understand that the Bible is full of metaphorical or figurative language, poetic language. And just because a particular word is used doesn't mean it has to be dogmatic to mean a certain way in a certain place. We should be very diligent students of the Scripture to look at the Bible as a whole. And here I remember as I read this verse, I remember an old saying growing up. Many of you, especially those of you who are older than me, I won't call you old. I feel really old today because for the first time I step up here with the reading glasses today. So I'm turning over a new leaf. But I remember a saying from my childhood, all growing up, that reminds me of this verse. And it simply goes like this: you put up hay while the sun's shining. You put up hay while the sun is shining. You work while there's opportunity to work. This is a lesson for us in this passage here that tells us that we should be workers when the time is available to do so. And don't sleep through the time of harvest. It reminds me of the verse when Yeshua said, pray that the Father will send laborers. For the fields are white, but the laborers are few. Let us not be sleepers during the time of harvest. Proverbs chapter 6, 6 through 8 tells us this particular verse 5, chapter 10, verse 5, about gathering in the summer. Reminded me of this verse just a few chapters before, Proverbs 6, 6 through 8. It says, "Go to the ant, you lazy man." This is the International Standard Version. I like this version, the way it worded. It says, go to the ant. That word go to the ant really means to, the parentheses, the emphasis or mind, means to look towards or to look at the ant. You lazy man. Observe its ways and become wise. Why does he say look to the ant to become wise when he's talking about working while there's opportunity? In verse 7 he clarifies. He said it has no commander, officer, or ruler, but prepares its provisions in the summer and gathers its food in the harvest. He's diligent to be about the work and the business. Look to the ant. Translation in King James says sluggard. Look towards the ant and observe his ways. That's what this is telling us to do, observe his ways. What does this tell us? We should be self-motivated in all that we do. We should be self-motivated when it comes to our daily mundane task of everyday life, when it comes to work. Whether it's getting up out of the bed when we should and getting the day started, or taking every opportunity that we have to share the gospel. And as Daniel often quotes, and when absolutely necessary, use words. It's another thing I heard during Karis's testimony. I heard when she talked about her sister, she used the word patience and graceful and gracious. When she began to inquire and look for herself and examine her own faith for the first time in her life, she was met by grace and patience. And she was also met with someone trying to force feed. And that method usually is ineffective. But we should be self-motivated people in all that we do, especially about the Father's business. Look to the ant and observe his ways and become wise. In chapter 10, verses 6 through verse 32, if you see a lot of your Bibles, different translations, English translations, they'll have headers to kind of identify the section of Scripture. And this particular section, a particular translation, I can't remember which one it was, says, righteous and wicked are compared. In chapter 10, verses 6 through 32. As you open up the book of Proverbs, you see, in the very early on in the book of Proverbs, you see wisdom is portrayed as a woman who cries out in the street. And we find comparisons of various topics in the book of Proverbs. And in chapter 10, verse 6 through 32, we have that righteousness compared to wicked. And we look at verse 6, opens up. It says, blessings are upon the head of the just, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. The Lexham English Bible translated as blessings belong to the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. I want to take a few moments as we go through these next few verses, and we're going to talk about some words and what they mean and what they don't mean. Because everybody here can pretty much attest that if I were to ask you to say, could you give me a definition for violence? Everybody here would probably have a various version, but it would involve violence of some sort. Some sort of an act of wickedness that inflicted hurt or harm. But I want us to look at, again, every translation that we have uses translator bias. There's four major points to scriptural translations, going from one language to another, from the original to the transferred language. One of them is exegetical decision making, and how to determine what text to use and how to translate it best, because there is no one for one word going from one language to another oftentimes. But I want to clarify something about the book of Proverbs that you've probably been taught your whole life. I was, and I believed it for many years of my life. The book of Proverbs is not a book full of promises and guarantees to you. It is a book of wise sayings. Oftentimes my whole life I hear about these promises of God and about how if you do this, then your children will do that. And if you do this, this is the way it's going to be. And sometimes you struggle because you do the best you can and your children don't do what you think they should do. You wonder, well, what happened to the promise? But Proverbs is a book of wise sayings to help guide us through life and gives us hope, not a guarantee. But blessings are upon the head of the just, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. Let's take a look at a few words. If you notice behind me on the screen, you see that I've got some emphasis on some blue words, and beside them are a Strong's link number so you can do the research for yourself. But we're going to take a look at the word just and the word violence and the word covereth here. I'm going to share with you what those words mean. The first word that we run across that I want to talk about is Hebrew word 2555. Strong's word H2555, which is a word which is, I've used a means instead of putting the actual Hebrew word up there. I used a phonetic way to help you pronounce it, which would be the word komos, which means false, wrong, cruelty, or injustice. And I'm going to share with you a couple of examples of that word being used. We look at a reference here of Genesis chapter 6, verse 11. If you want to follow along, we're going to be looking at this word that's translated, this word komos, which is translated as the word violence here in the King James in Hebrew, or in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 6. And this word here, Genesis 6:11, says, "And the earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence." When we hear violence, we think of war and riot. When we hear that word violence, we think of all things physically violent. But this word within itself, and I want to share with you another place this word is used in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 6. Note to self right now, don't use that color again, because that's hard to see from here. I hope you can see it better than I can. But if need be, you're welcome to turn these backstage lights down if you want to. It'll help me be able to see the screen better probably. So if you just want to turn those down in the back maybe. But Deuteronomy 19, verse 16 tells us, you can leave it, yeah, you got the front ones up, okay. Says, "If a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him, that which is wrong." The word is translated as the word wrong in Deuteronomy 19:16. Same word, violence. But this word simply means anything that's false, wrong, cruel, or injustice. Injustice or cruelty or falseness covers the mouth of the wicked. What does this mean? And this word just, we'll look at the first one, H6662, which is Sadiq, which means righteous, lawful in one's cause, in government, or conduct, or character. A couple of places here again in Genesis 6:9, we see that. "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with Elohim." The word here is just. He was a just man. We also have here in Genesis chapter 7, verse 1. "And Yahweh said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee I have seen righteous before me." Here the word is translated as righteous. It's translated as the word just here in Proverbs 10:6. Also we see it in Psalm 119 and 37. Forgive me because I'm using the old school way to do this. 119, 137. I'm going to share with you. I'm sorry I ran out of time. I would have posted all these up on here, but I didn't want to have 74 slides to have to show you. But in Psalms 119, hang on a minute, let me get there. 119, 137. Let me find it here. "Righteousness art thou, O Yahweh, and upright are thy judgments." We see that word is translated as righteous. We see it also in Proverbs chapter 9, in the previous chapter that we're looking at. In verse 9, it says, "Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase his learning." And then we have the last one, covereth. Or it's translated in the Lexington English Bible as the word conceals. Because if you read this at face value, let's just be honest, because there's a lot of people that do. There are a lot of people that read the Bible at face value. And it says, blessing belongs to the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. What does it mean to conceal violence? And I found this is an interesting word. This Greek word, kasal, which means to conceal, to hide. It also means to cover or to spread over, to be overwhelmed or to be clothed. By implication, it means to plump. The root word we find here is Hebrew word 3780, which means to grow fat or to be gorged with food, or sated, means full or filled. What does that mean here in translation? Let's look. I want to show you Numbers 20-11 real quick. It'd probably be faster if I use my phone. But 20-11 tells us, behold, there is a people come out of Egypt, which covereth the face of the earth. And we think about it that way. I don't need to necessarily go to Deuteronomy 13:8. Well, might as well. Got it up there. Deuteronomy 13:8. Which says, thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shall thine eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal him. There's the word, conceal him. This is talking about a friend or even a family member who tries to steer you away from following God. He says you are not to conceal him. So what is this verse really teaching us in the book of Proverbs in 10 verse 6? Blessings are upon the head of the just or the righteous one. Those who are lawful or righteous in one's cause, government, conduct, or character. He says, but violence or wrong or injustice covereth. And the word here, I believe a good translation would be to feel. Wrongfulness or cruelty or injustice fills the mouth of the wicked. When you look at it from that perspective. Now, again, we should understand that these are wise sayings that teach us how to be wise and to make good decisions. And I want to put a little plug in here to you because I know because of where we live. We live in an area here that's a touristy area that there's a lot of people that tend to move here with money. And I'm going to tell you something when it talks about Christian walk, in our faith walk, to follow Yeshua and his example, teaches us to be just, to be righteous, to be upright. And I'm going to tell you there's far more ways to be unjust and unrighteous than just your tongue. Prime example, I hear it all the time in my business, in the work that I do. Well, if it's a boy around here and I know him, well, I try to do this, but if I don't know them and they come up here and, they're from Florida and they got a lot of money, no pun to these people from Florida. I've already said it earlier in a joking way, so we've had to forgive a lot of people for that sin. But I joke around about Florida. I said the best thing ever come out of Florida was I-75 northbound. I don't say that about the people. I don't say that because it's too hot down there for me. Yeah, one of the reasons that I follow Yahweh is because I want to go to heaven. I do not want to go to hell, whatever that looks like. And Florida's hot. I don't like it. My wife loves it. I don't. I like it in the spring or in the fall. Even in the winter's okay. Heard that. But anyway, not to get too far off subject. But what I say is it's funny. I find people who claim to be believers, they will act a certain way to a certain group of people, and they will act another way to another group of people, and there is unjust weights and balances, and that is sin. You do not favor the righteous or the wealthy man above the poor. Now you can be graceful and gracious to those in whom you choose, but it is wrong to charge one price to one person and another price to another one and gouge them just because you think they can. That is wrong. Your price should be your price. If you choose to give a break to somebody because you're trying to be good to a brother who's in need, that is one thing. But when you deliberately gouge somebody because you think that they are able, that is wrong. That is using unjust weights and balances. There's a far greater way to be unjust than just with your lips. But it tells us that blessings are upon the head of the righteous, those who act lawfully, but violence or injustice or wrong or falsehood or cruelty fills the mouth. Again, this root word means to grow fat or be gorged with food. And that's why it's confusing sometimes when it says it covereth the mouth, which means really it's not a wrong translation, depending on the way you look at it, but it means the entire mouth is covered with deceit. That's what it means. It's spread over. It's filled just like Egypt covereth the whole earth. We know that Egypt didn't cover the whole earth. It was a metaphor. You know, when we say it, when it's raining cats and dogs, it doesn't mean it's really raining cats and dogs. But it covers the mouth fully, or it fills your mouth, is the same of those who are wicked. The Apostolic Bible Polyglot, which is an interlinear translation of the Greek Old Testament, translates this word or this verse this way: the blessing of the Lord is upon the just, or the head of the just, but the mouth of the impious he covers with untimely mourning. It's interesting. Let's look at a couple of those words in that translation. This is the Greek translation of the Old Testament of this particular verse. The first word we see is the just, which dikaios, which is the righteous or observing divine laws in a wide sense, upright, righteous, virtuous. Look at that last one, keeping the commands of God. It's amazing, that word. That's what that word means. And then the next word we see is the impious. Well, oftentimes we hear about people who talk about piety. What is piety? It's an outward expression of religiousness. I want to look pious means I'm trying to look holy. But this word is impious, is the way it's translated, and it's the word sebas, which means destitute of reverential awe towards God, irreverent or wicked. The next word we see is the word untimely, which literally, so interesting, is why we should study words, because this word is translated untimely. Now, how in the world would you get that from the word that means lifelessness or one without a soul? That's what the word means. That's the definition of that word. Absukos, which means lifeless or without a soul, is what that word means. That word is translated as untimely. Interesting word for translation choice. The next word we see is the word mourning. Greek 3997, which is penthos, which means mourning, grief, or sorrow. So what is this verse saying in the Greek to us? It's simply this. It's saying that the blessings or the commendation or the acceptance of Yahweh is upon the head of the righteous ones, those who are obedient, but the mouth of those who are destitute or irreverent toward God, He covers them. And I didn't go over the word covers. It means He overspreads them with a sorrow that portrays their life as having no meaning. They're overtaken with meaningless sorrow. My life has no purpose. We sat and listened to the testimony of Sister Karis up here, talked about the times where she daily thought her life wasn't worth it. I thought about taking my own life. This verse made so much sense when I heard her say that. when we live a life of impiety, unrighteousness, it brings overwhelming sorrow in your life to the point where she said, I just wanted it to be over. That's what this verse means, and it's hard to gather that from the word untimely mourning. You literally mourn over your own life. You don't want to be anymore. Interesting, this translation shows that way. Next we have verse 7. It says the memory, this one's very important. It says the memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. What is this verse saying? We should hopefully be able to grasp this verse. But it's interesting to look at a few more words. First word we're going to look at is Hebrew 21:42, zakar, which means remembrance or memorial. Now, a good reference here is Psalm 112, verse 6. I want to share that with you. I said this will be faster, but I'm almost curious if I'm faster on my book. It says, surely he shall not be moved, forever the righteous shall be in everlasting remembrance. The word is remembrance. We can say, okay, well, memory, remembrance, I kind of get it. Next word is the blessed, which is barakah, which means blessing or praise of God or benediction. I'm going to share with you this particular verse. I didn't put it up on the screen, but I talked about when you see that says APB or ABP, that stands for the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. If you want to see one of those, you can, by the way, download a free digital version if you'd like to have one. It is an interlinear, again, of the whole Bible, but it uses the Greek Septuagint to translate the Old Testament. But it is amazing that this word here is very different. Now, I'm going to read this to you again. The memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. And I'm going to go back to that in just a moment. Remember that phrase, great with child, and this word blessed. And I'm going to share it with you in just a moment. But the next word we're looking at for the sake of time is we're looking at Hebrew word 8034, which is Shem, which is a lot of times those people who are afraid to try to utter the name of our Heavenly Father, our Creator of the universe and all that is. They fear so much in reverent fear that they won't try to utter the name, and they just simply call him Hashem, which means the name. That's where we get this word. The word is Shem. And we see passages, for example, in this particular, and I want to share with you a couple of verses real quick. I'm going to look at Exodus chapter 23, verses 20 and 21. I want to share with you a couple of verses to give you some cross-reference to some full circle perspective. Exodus 23, verses 20 and 21 says, behold, I send an angel before thee to keep thee in the way and to bring thee in the place in which I have prepared. Beware of him and obey his voice, provoke him not, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my Shem, or my name, is in him. We find in Matthew 24, verse 5. Matthew 24, verse 5 tells us, so get up there, 24, verse 5 says, for many shall come in my name. It's the Greek version of this word. Saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. John 5:43, I'll just go ahead and ad-lib that for you. It says, for I come in my Father's name. What does this mean? I come in my Father's name. This word Shem is not a name of God. It simply means name. Now it can mean when you say, Jason, what is your Shem? You shouldn't ask me that because you already called me by my name. What is your Shem? My name is Jason. That is what it means. But it has far greater meaning. It's more encompassing than just what is your pronunciation of your name. It's not really about the pronunciation. The Shem is, what it really means is talking about the reputation, the fame, the glory, or the monument or memorial, referring to the honor, character, or the report of a person. I've talked about it many times that this assembly represents the name of Yahweh. And individually, every person in this assembly represents the name of every other person in this assembly. Not the pronunciation of your name, Chris or Ronald, but it's the character. That's what this means. There are people who get hung up in this name pronunciation thing. As you've already heard, be comfortable where you are about the names. I have my druthers and what I think, and you may have your druthers. As long as we're talking about the one in here, I'm okay with it. As long as you don't start trying to call him something crazy like Beelzebub or something. That's crazy. But whether you pronounce it Yahweh, Yahovah, I don't care. Yeshua, Yehoshua, Yahusha, whatever. Joshua, whatever. The bottom line is I'm concerned about the Shem that you represent. The name, his character, who you are. And if the world could realize how easy it is to take his Shem, his name in vain, by the very lives we live. That's why we're reading the book of Proverbs, so that we can gain wisdom on how to represent his name. The last word is the word rot, which literally means to decay. That's literally what it means. Simple as that. Now I want to share with you this particular verse. I don't think I put it. I'm going to check the next slide. No, I did not. I'm not going to let you look at the next one. I'm going to turn it back. But I want to share with you the Apostolic Bible Polyglot of this translation. Remember, keep in mind, the memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. And I want to share with you the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. Listen very carefully to what the same verse, as you follow along here, listen to the way it's worded. Remembrance of the just is with commendation, but the name of the impious is extinguished. It's interesting, that Greek word, commendation. Remember, remembrance of the just is with commendation. We see it here as the word blessed. The Hebrew word blessed. But it's the word commendation. Now, the interesting thing about that word, you're like, well, Jason, what in the word are you talking about? Some woman having a kid. Here when it says great with child, let me tell you what that word means. It means to be big with child or pregnant. That's what the word means. What in the world is this trying to tell us? Let me tell you just simply this. The memory or the memorial of the just is easily noticed. Like a woman who's big with child. It's pretty easy to see. But the name or the reputation or the character of the wicked is extinguished. The word here means to be quenched. It means to be put out, like a fire put out with water. Your name is no more. I met a man the other day who was talking about a former co-worker who said, you know, I got along with a guy great. Didn't have a problem with him until he left the job, and then I found out that I haven't met a human being since he left working for me. I haven't found a single human being that liked that man. He said, I didn't realize. Goes to church every Sunday. Not a human being that this man ever met who was his employer, not a single human being that he knew liked that man when he left his job. They wouldn't say anything to him because he worked for him. But once he left, everybody started saying, man, I couldn't stand him. Carrying the name of Christ. But the memory That word means memorial or remembrance. The memory or the memorial or the remembrance, what people think about of the blessed who carry the name, should be noticeable just as a woman who's about to give birth to a child. It should be noticeable in your life. Verse 8. The wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. What does that mean? That first, I'm going to look at a couple words here. The word prating fool, which is, the first one is shall fall, which means lips, speech, or language. We see the word prating fool. The next one, the fool means evil, which means foolish, or one who despises wisdom, one who mocks when guilty, or one who is quarrelsome. It says a wise heart receives commandments, but a prating fool, or in other words, a babbling, some translations, it's a babbling fool shall fall. What does this mean? Here's a couple other translations. The Basic Bible in English, that's the BBE, says a wise-hearted man will let himself be ruled. It's a submissive man who will submit to the authority of another. What's the opposite of submission? Pride. Pride comes just before what? The fall. He says, will let himself be ruled, but the man whose talk is foolish will have a fall. I didn't translate the word fall. It means what it says, and it means we'll stumble a long way or we'll be cast down. That's what the word means. The Easy English Bible reads, wise people listen to wise rules, but a fool who talks too much will destroy himself. I can't help but think about the book of James. It says, man who can control his tongue is a perfect man. It's just a little member, a little flame that burns down the entire forest. Now, the T4T, if you're not familiar with that translation, that means translation for translators. That's actually what that translates. A lot of people are like, what is that? It's a pretty good translation, is what it is. Check it out. It says, wise people heed good instructions or advice, but people who talk foolishly will ruin themselves. I like to hear Daniel when he talks about that. He said, that's why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should receive instruction. That's what the word commandments doesn't mean the Torah specifically, but it talks about rules in general. A wise man will listen to wise instruction. It says, don't step right there on the roof. That's a soft spot. That might kill you. That's not in the Torah, but it's a good instruction. We should always be willing to hear one another out as iron sharpens iron. One of my favorite passages in the New Testament is when Paul says, though all things are lawful unto me, not all things are expedient. Just because it's not against the Torah doesn't make it always a good idea for you to do. That's literally what that means. Just because it's not breaking a rule doesn't mean it's a good idea always. Sometimes we have ideas. We have epiphanies. And if we're left to ourselves, sometimes we'll run off in left field somewhere and do crazy things. That's why it's good to rub elbows with other brothers. We were like, I don't know if I'd do that for you. I don't know if that's such a good idea. But a wise heart will receive instruction, but a babbling fool, or one who talks foolishly. Now that word specifically means to talk foolishly. one who's talking when they don't know what they're talking about, is a good way to put that. Verse 9, he that walketh uprightly walketh surely, but he that persevereth his way, perverteth, I'm sorry, I knew I couldn't read that right, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known. This is an interesting passage. We just talked about one that says, for the one who's just, who walks uprightly, that his memory, the memorial of him, will be known. And that's why it's called a memorial. They will remember it. But it's the one who is foolish or one who is wicked that the memory of them quickly fades. Nobody remembers their name. Nobody likes you anyway. Let's keep it simple for what it is. But check out a couple of these words here. That word uprightly, Hebrew 85:37, which means integrity or innocence, morally, or simplicity, upright, or completeness. The word surely here is batak, which means safely, security, or securely. Safely, security, or securely. The next word we have 6140, which is perverteth, which means to distort, to make crooked, or twist. The next one is 1870, which is actually pronounced Derek, or it could be Derek, which means journey, road, or the course of life is what it means. The next one is known, Yada, Hebrew 30:45. There's a very interesting thing about that word Yada. It's translated as shall be known. I'll tell you where that place, that word's used. Genesis 4:1. And Adam knew Eve, and she bare a son. The word Yada. It's interesting. When we look at the Apostolic Bible Polyglot again in that particular verse, it's amazing. When it says, it refers to one, and I'll just read it to you real quick. I don't think I pulled it up. Says, the one who goes simply, instead of uprightly, the one who goes simply goes complying, but the one perverting his ways shall be known. That word simply means openly, frankly, and sincerely. In other words, your life should look like a glass house. You should be open and transparent people, easily seen for who you are. But that last one says shall be known. It's translated the same way. Shall be known. Gnosko is the word. Greek word gnosko. Greek 1097. And it's an actual word that is a Jewish idiom for physical intercourse between a man and a woman. What does it mean? It says, he that walks with integrity walks securely. That word walk, that word walketh and walketh are actually two different words. I didn't give the meaning, but they mean the same thing. One is a kin word of the other one, but it doesn't mean as you're walking down the street. But what it's talking about is the manner of your life. As you walk out your life is what it's referring to, your journey. And actually that's why I went ahead and used the word his ways, 1870, which means the journey, road, or course of life. A man who walks with integrity or innocence or simplicity, transparency, if you will, walks securely or with security. But he that perverteth or twists, distorts, or makes crooked his path, you will be found out. That's what it means. People will come to know. They will know who you are. Not by what comes out of this, but by what comes from these. Verse 10, he that winketh with the eye causes sorrow. We have a repeat here. But the prating fool shall fall. There's that prating, that babbling fool again. It's the same words. That's why I just underlined it. I didn't use it again. But it says, he that winketh the eye. Again, we know, we see we're playing a joke on one another, and let's don't get too serious, because somewhere down the line, so even growing up in the mainstream, you can't have fun when you're a believer. Nobody jokes. Yeshua never told a joke. He didn't have any fun. He never jumped out behind a bush and went, I got you. I'm sure he didn't do any of that. That would have been evil. But he was a man who walked just like we did. But, sometimes we're joking around and you'd be like, and we winked with that eye, and we're telling one another something. But in this case, that word, one who winketh with the eye, literally what it means to narrow, to squeeze, or to pinch partially. It can mean to partially bite the lip, or to blink with the eye as a gesture of malice. You've seen it. You've seen people do it with meanness in their mind. And that last word, sorrow, which means atzabeth, which means pain, hurt, injury, or wound. And again, I've already noted the prating fool is repeated again from the previous verse in verse 8. But he that winketh with the eye. What this is simply teaching us, it doesn't tell us don't wink at your wife. She's going to think you're trying to be evil. What it's telling us is don't be crooked and malicious people. Be honest and upright in all that we do. Doesn't mean we can't have fun, a good time, and all those things. Verse 11. I chose two translations here, the KJV, because I'm platforming from it, and I choose the ICB. How many of you are familiar with the ICB? Well, you have little kids should know that, and it's the one that most of us should probably read. It's the International Children's Bible. Many of us would do well if we read it. But verse 11 says, the mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. There's the word, see the word violence, and the word covereth the mouth again. I didn't repeat it because it means the same thing. We've already talked about it means injustice. Violence means injustice. That's what it means, most simply put. It means crooked, wrong, unjust, whatever. Fill in the blank. It has a plethora of meanings that's full encompassing, but covereth or fills the mouth or completely covers the mouth. It's just like, when I tell you, hey, KK, wipe your face. Your whole mouth's covered in spaghetti. That's exactly what it means. Your mouth is covered with injustice. But the ICB translated, it's like a fountain of water. The words of a good person give life. But the words of the wicked contain nothing but violence or crookedness or injustice. A couple of words to look at there is well and life. The word 4726 is translated as the word well in the King James, which means makor, which means spring or a fountain or a source of life, joy, or purification. In other words, the mouth of a just, righteous, or upright man is pleasant and refreshing. Because it's a well of life. It's like a cool spring on a hot day. It's welcoming. That word, kai, which means living, alive, reviving, renewal, or sustenance, or maintenance, means it brings life to those that hear it. Hey, I'm just as guilty as anybody, especially if you got a parent that a kid will bust every nerve you ever thought about having, much less the ones you really have. It's tough sometimes to speak life. You catch yourself. So I'm preaching to you as much as I'm preaching to me as much as I'm preaching to you. But the reality is, and that doesn't mean there's not a time and place for stern talk. Don't get me wrong. But our speech, our language, should be life-giving and refreshing to those around us. And I'm running out of time, just in time. I want to share with you just a couple of takeaways of what these verses teach us from wisdom perspective. And before we do, I want to share with you this verse that comes to memory in James 3, verse 11 through 13. It says, "Doth the fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries? Either a vine, figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom." A man who controls his tongue is a perfect man. But again, injustice is far above and beyond just the tongue. It's in everything that we do. Says who we are. Everything that, for example, Sister Karis, and I don't mean to pick on her, but her testimony was relevant to the message today. Everything that she saw growing up was exactly the opposite of what she heard. You can shout from the rooftops all you want to. You can sing praises till your larynx blows out. But let me tell you, the best form of worship you could ever offer is obedience. Obedience is better than sacrifice. And if we obey, it will be well with us. So what are some takeaways as I close with this? Here they are. Now I can barely read that, so I'm going to turn around. Number one, right here. What's some takeaways from these verses of Scriptures? Number one, be diligent in all that we do, in both our everyday work activities as well as in our efforts to advance the kingdom of heaven. Number two, we're to honor Yah's name by walking justly in conversation, relationships, and our business transactions. Because, like it or not, we leave an impression everywhere we go, whether it's good or bad. And crookedness comes in many forms other than speech. Number three, build or create or leave a legacy. What do you want if Yeshua delays his coming and you pass? Don't you want to carry a good name? Wouldn't you want people to say, as they stand over your body and say, this is a man who served God with every fiber of his being. He was honorable. He was a good husband. He was a good father. He was honest in his business dealings. And your memory will carry on. And as we read in Ecclesiastes, when a man dies, when it's done, when you got to work while it's day, while you're alive, because when nighttime comes, you die and you can't do any more good or evil. But what can happen is the legacy you leave behind will carry on, whether it's good or bad. But leave a legacy that will live on to benefit others beyond your mortal life. Carry a name that brings glory to Yahweh and Yeshua, and show the world who God is through your life. Number four, be moldable, teachable people. Listen to wise counsel. Save yourself a lot of heartache, and trust me, in my own life, a lot of collateral damage. Number five, don't speak ignorantly. Speak with purpose and intention. My grandfather used to, I know it wasn't his original, but my mom already mentioned it. My grandfather used to say this to me all the time when I was young. He said, son, it's better many times to remain silent and appear to be a fool than to speak and to remove all doubt. So just remember those words. And lastly, we want to be a fountain of life to others and God honoring in both speech and our deeds. Let us take these words, apply them to our life. Thank you, and I hope you'll continue with us as we continue to journey through these passages of Scripture in the book of Proverbs, as we continue to learn some great life lessons through that.